Join this seminar from today. For me, participating from Horsham, Victoria, this is the land of the Wotjobaluk, Jawa, Jali, Wagai and Jabbergalt peoples. I extend my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and any elders who may be joining us today. I give recognition to their proud traditions, vibrant culture and continued connection to land, water and community. So once again, welcome. My name is Laverne Lehman and once we get through their presentations, I'll facilitate the questions that we put to them through the chat. So feel free to ask questions on the chat and we'll get through as many of those as we can with each of our speakers this morning. We are recording this meeting, so please note that this Teams meeting is being recorded. I'm hoping one of the DELP staff is doing that now. Please do not record the presentation. If you would like to view the session again at a later date, recordings will be available on the SWIFT website. So there's plenty of opportunity for people to come back and look at it later on. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speakers this morning. We have two speakers here, so this is two for the price of one. Karen O'Keefe is a regional agriculture land care facilitator with the Corangamite CMA. Karen O'Keefe is passionate about the environment, sustainable agriculture and rural communities. She has a background of growing up on a farm in southwest Victoria, studying a Bachelor of Applied Science in Environmental Management and many years of professional experience in various land care roles. Karen also works with Southern Farming Systems, has taught agriculture and conservation and land management at TAFE, and is a graduate of the Australian Rural Leadership Program. Karen has played a key role in a number of successful initiatives to increase the skills, knowledge and confidence of farmers. Sorry, I hope someone's just muted themselves. There's a bit of noise going on in the background, so I'm not sure who that is. This presentation will share key learnings around engaging with farmers to influence practice change on farm relating to NRM, focusing on the process and how to create buy-in. Our second speaker in this session is for this particular presentation is Bronwyn Ban. She's also a regional agriculture land care facilitator with the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority. Bronwyn has worked in land care, natural resource management and education for about 20 years with degrees in environmental management and education. She farms at Joel South and from a young age recognised that women are often valued, portrayed and treated in ways that don't make any sense. This recognition informs Bronwyn's work and volunteer time. Bronwyn was part of a group of staff at the Wimmera CMA who developed Chicks in the Sticks as an engagement model designed for female farmers. Chicks in the Sticks has been used in multiple NRM groups and even attracted international attention. So today, Karen and Bronwyn are going to share some food for thought around things to consider when engaging and influencing farmers to protect and enhance biodiversity assets on farm. The presentation will consider farmer temperament types and MyersBriggs, farmer motivations and attitudes, unconscious bias and diversity, and the ability to put yourself in the shoes of others to see different perspectives. Today is about introducing some concepts to think about and consider the people part of biodiversity on farms. So welcome Karen and Bron, and I will hand over to you now.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the intro, Laverne. I think you've cut a fair bit of the presentation off that I was going to talk about. So thanks for that. You've done part of my job today. So yeah, so as Laverne's mentioned, the main focus of our presentation today is around the people part of biodiversity on farms. And we're going to introduce a number of different concepts to think about and consider. We're not going to be able to go into extreme detail with all of them, so it's just to provide a bit of a snapshot there's some things to think about, when we're working with farmers. So before we start, I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we are presenting from today and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming from Wadawurrung country today. So yeah, as Laverne's very nicely said, my name's Karina Keaton. I'm the Regional Agricultural Land Care Facilitator with the Corangamite CMA. I feel really fortunate to have grown up on a farm in the region, and I have these fantastic memories of being in the ute with my dad and my brother and going around the sheep. And I remember distinctively, we would pull up and Dad would wind the windows down and we would sit there and we would watch the broggers out on the wetlands, and they would pick up their sticks and do their little dancey thing. And so from a very early age, I've been really interested in birds and plants and in the landscape and obviously farming as well. And for the last 15 years I've worked sort of in the land care space, predominantly with farmers. So I'll hand over to Bron now.
Good morning, everyone. As Laverne's already mentioned, I'm the Regional Agriculture Land Care Facilitator in the Wimmera. There's actually a Regional Agriculture Land Care Facilitator no matter what NRM region that you come from in Australia. So we'll provide a link so you can find out who yours is if you're not already aware. And as Laverne's mentioned already, I have been involved in natural resource management, land care and education for about 20 years. I farm on Jabberong country in the Upper Wimmera catchment and pay my respects to traditional owners participating in the webinar today and to elders past, present and emerging. I'm really looking forward to hearing Tammy's presentation today on healing country and listening to traditional owners. So today it's all about biodiversity on farms and the social sciences behind it. So why do we need to tailor biodiversity programs for farmers? Well, we know that they're custodians in the Wimmera of 80% of the land, and in the Corangamite region where Karen's from, that's another 70% there as well. We know that agricultural land is home to threatened species, ecological vegetation classes, priority waterways and remnant vegetation. And on the flip side, we also know that there are multiple productivity benefits for farms with increased biodiversity. And having listened to some of the past presentations, we know over the last couple of weeks of the biodiversity seminar that the presenters have already acknowledged that farmers are carriers for country and have various motivations to enhance biodiversity on their farm. Our presentation today will look into these motivations, values and behaviours and explore how these social sciences can influence extension and engagement. So the Wimmera CMA and an increasing number of natural resource management agencies, including the Corangamite CMA, are using social science to better understand the attitudes and values of communities. The Wimmera CMA began commissioning these landholder surveys in 2002, and the results from these surveys inform our work. Results from the 2017 survey indicate that there is a strong sense of stewardship amongst respondents, with 87% of landholders stating that being able to pass the property on to others in better condition was important. 64% of those surveyed stated that they highly value the environment on their farm, sustaining life for many different plants and animals. And these are just two examples from the survey, which offer some really encouraging data. There's plenty more there. However, we can't simply assume that positive environmental values that we're finding in these surveys always leads to practice change. So the challenge for those working in biodiversity and extension is this space between values and behaviours. So whilst most farmers value a farm in good condition that's also supporting biodiversity, a range of factors can mean converting those values to behaviours is really challenging. So barriers to adopting these behaviours can relate to attitude, social norms, and their ability to actually make that behaviour happen, which I've detailed in that theory of planned behaviour diagram there. So let's take a look at rotational or timed grazing as an example. Whilst a farmer may value and understand the soil and productivity benefits of rotational grazing, they may also be taking into consideration the costs and logistics of extra fencing, the time it takes to regularly move livestock, the complications around joining and drafting mobs, as well as other farmers in the district. What might they think, particularly if their attempts at changing to something new for the first time fails? If all of these factors, such as the ones I've just mentioned, then are too complex, then the behaviour is less likely to occur even if they value the benefits that they may get. I'll now pass over to Karen, who will provide a bit more detail about temperament types.
Thanks, Bron. So what we're going to have a look at now is personality, temperament, and decision making. So our temperament are the parts of our behaviour, parts of our personality that affect our behaviour. So this is how we respond to things, how we make decisions, how we communicate, and how we learn. Your personality is a combination of qualities that shapes our character. So this is where we're just going to have a quick look at the Myers-Briggs type indicator, just to give us a little bit of a feel for that. So basically, if we can recognise our own values and our own temperament and personality, and we can recognise that of others, being those who we want to engage with, and sometimes if we can recognise that they actually are quite different, then we can modify our message to better influence those who we want to work with. So there's been a little bit of research done that finds that the one-size-fits-all approach that we sometimes use in agricultural extension and natural resource management doesn't necessarily always meet the need of our target audiences. So just a little bit about the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So this is one of the most widely used psychological tools in the world. There's been a lot of research that's gone into this tool, and basically it's there to help individuals understand their personality type and the relationship with their preferences and how we interact with others. So you'll see there's 4 different preferences. So one is around energy. So generally we are either extroverted or introverted. The second one is around how we gather our information. So we're either sensing or intuitive. The third one is decision-making preferences. So this is whether we're thinking driven or we're more feeling driven. And the next one is lifestyle. So that's around judging and perceiving. So for those who may have had a little bit of experience with the Myers-Briggs tool, we're actually really keen to see what we've got, see what types we've got online today. So if you're comfortable to share what your Myers-Briggs is and your occupation, so whether you're a farmer or whether you're a landcare volunteer or an NRM staff member, please feel free to have a little hack in the chat box. So for example, if you're an ESTJ and you're a farmer, or you might be an INFJ and you might be a landcare volunteer, Bron's just going to have a little glance through there as we take on the next couple of slides and just see if there's any interesting trends or anything come out of that. So thank you in advance for having a bit of a crack at that. So this slide's a bit full on. There's a fair bit going on here. This is just providing a little bit more detail around the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So we're not going to go through this in great detail because I can imagine everyone's probably sitting there going, oh, what am I? Am I the extrovert or the judge? And so we're all like sitting here trying to read this slide. So this is around, we're mentioning this because we're about to slip into talking about the farmer temperament types in a little bit more detail. And the temperament types have actually come out of this Myers-Briggs theory. And just before we move on, I'll give one farming example around the Myers-Briggs and why it can be useful to think about this sort of stuff. So, for example, if a farmer is an extrovert, then these people are more likely to love going to field days, love going to workshops, they love talking, they mix and mingle, they get their energy from others. So if we're running farmer field days, there's a whole, you know, if you're an extrovert, you love that stuff, like you're there. The introverts, these people these farmers enjoy working on their own. So you might be thinking now of some farmers who you know that maybe, you know, are heading towards being an introvert or an extrovert. These people are more likely to kind of give you a call, you know, the week after they've had some ideas presented to them, and they'll talk through it, they'll take it home, they'll digest it on their own, they might have a one-on-one conversation, they might want a one-on-one farm visit. So it's just a little bit of an example of how we can look at this and think about our audience and how that might impact. And now I just want to look through the chat box because I can see all these things popping up, but we're not doing that yet. So moving into the temperament types. So there's been some fascinating research done in Australian agriculture looking at 4 different temperament types. So we've got dependables, and this picks up on the SJ part of the Myers-Briggs that we just looked at before, so the sensing, judging. So if someone has the sensing and judging coming up in their Myers-Briggs, then this is deemed to be that they're a dependable type. We've got doers, we've also got pioneers, and we've got team builders. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the characteristics of some of these farmer types. And again, have a think about some farmers that you know and whether they know where they may fit with this. So I'll just also mention that while there's nothing black and white about personality types, the 4 temperament groups do have distinct characteristics that help describe differences in the farming population. So dependables, these people are careful, they're reliable, they seek social stability, order, security. These people are proud to be farmers. They love attention to detail, they love deadlines, they're very practical, and they like solid facts. They don't like to change just for the sake of it. They like to see things happening over the neighbour's fence, make sure it's going to work locally before they'll implement it. So more than half of the farming population are in this dependable type from the research that's been done. And that's a much greater proportion than the general population of normal everyday Australians, whoever they are. So the doers is pretty self-explanatory. These people get stuff done. They have a really good sense of timing. They take risks. They don't mind taking risks to get stuff done. Sometimes they do the job and then they fix up other bits of detail later on. They're not as rule driven. There are twice as many doers in the Australian farming population than in the general population. So the majority of farmers are dependables and doers. Then we move on to the pioneers. So these people try anything. These are often the first farmers to try something new for the district. They may implement a new practice. They love strategic planning, problem solving, understanding complex systems and thinking big picture. Approximately 15% of Australian farmers are this temperament, and nearly twice of the general population are that. The last one is team builders. So these are genuine people with integrity. They try to reach their goals. They've got a strong personal code of ethics. They think about what they hope for and they talk about what they imagine, fairly open-minded. They focus on the people part. Only 5% of Australian farmers have been sampled as team builders. Now, this slide created some interesting discussion in itself around how we best present this information. So I might be guilty of being an SJ myself, so I do like to have some concrete kind of facts and figures and things. So I apologise if this isn't picking up on your pioneer or team builder personality type if you happen to be that temperament. So this is basically what we're doing. We're highlighting here. There's been some research done around the farmers that we just talked about. So 80% of farmers look like they are dependables and doers. And Jeanette Long from South Australia has done some interesting research around looking at land care facilitators, so more the natural resource management staff, and 60% of them actually had a complete total opposite temperament to the farmers. Complete opposite. So seeing the world very differently. So the key part here is that we've got the majority of farmers are a certain temperament type, not all of them, but the majority. And we've got a high percentage in this study example of landcare environment staff who are completely opposite. So the trick here is that unless we make an effort to communicate to those temperaments that are different to us, our messaging will only appeal to those who are the same as us. So we're just providing some food for thought around that. So further to this, so when it comes to attracting new participants and communicating with farmers, it's really important. So in the Crangamite region, in order to appeal to the majority of our dependable and doer farmers, an example, we've got 100 soil monitoring sites set up across the region. And this means that farmers can see those trial sites over their neighbour's fence or on their property. They can have local field days. They see what practices and what applications of lime or whatever else are going onto those. They see it in their landscape, and then that helps them get the confidence to make those changes on their farm. That's how they like to learn. They want to know what's going to work locally. So that's one example of that. So just slipping back to the communication stuff. So dependables and doers need really clear instructions and a process to follow. So if we're doing a management agreement with these farmers, they like to know the details and they like to be taken through the steps, and they want to see how it connects to the farm, the greater farm outcome. Pioneers and team builders, they like to see the bigger goals or the outcomes first and then be provided with the tasks. So it's quite different. When it comes to making decisions, so the majority of the farmers, the dependables and the doers, they like to make a decision and then move on. They don't like too much information. They just like the concrete stuff in a logical, sequenced manner that makes sense to them, what they need to make the decision. They do actually think about what the neighbours think and what their peers think. Whereas the pioneers, the ones who are really keen to try new different things, they don't care about what the neighbours think. They just give it a crack. Okay, and they like to explore the possibilities and the options in a logical way before they make a decision. The team builders, they like to consider all the people before they make the decision. So you can see there's some really strong differences coming through here, and that impacts on how we influence when we talk about natural resource management. So there's a booklet here that's online. You can download this. It provides some really great context and more meat on the bones to what I've just really quickly gone through with regards to the different temperament types. And there's also a bit of a quick and nasty test in there. You can do the test yourself and see what temperament type you come out as. So that's a really interesting tool to use. So the key part here is around different audiences require tailored messaging, and the most influential adapt their messaging to who they're working with, and also access a range of different people on the farm. So this is where we start thinking about some of the people with different views, people who are different ages on the farm, people who are different gender. These people understand themselves as well. They have a high level of self-awareness, which makes them really effective communicators. So just changing tempo a little bit. So we're now just going to slip into the next stage of our presentation, which is around tailoring programs to suit specific target audiences. So with this one here, it's around working with rural women. And so we know that 41% of the agricultural workforce in Australia are women, and 55% of agricultural science university degree graduates are women. And we know that women are influential in decision making on farm, particularly I know in the Crangamite region where we've got mixed farm businesses. We've got a lot of women who are actually managing the livestock, so they love sheep. The boys love their toys and they love the cropping stuff. And so we know we've got women on farms who are making decisions. And so we see this as an opportunity to be able to engage with potentially new farms if we engage through the women. And the other thing to recognise is unconscious bias is real. And just an example of this. So when I first started in my land care facilitator role 15, 16 years ago, I remember making up the landholder files, all the names for the 180 odd members we had. And for most of them, I put the men's name on them, even though most of them, a lot of them were married, and I did know some of their wives. It was just this, when I look back now, I'm like, well, that's unconscious bias. I just kind of put the dudes' names on there and, you know, didn't think anything of it. So it's really interesting just to think about this stuff and, yeah, just have to think about how it might implicate the work and whether there's opportunity to be a bit more diverse in who we engage and how we think about that. So some of the benefits we've found of engaging through the women. So we've established a rural women's network in the Corangamite region, and we have workshops, field days, bus trips, all sorts of things. So I found it's been a really great way to attract new participants. We get new members to land care. We get new relationships formed. They know who the CMA is now. They know what the CMA does. We can introduce all different NRM concepts, and we've found that it does increase the skills, knowledge and confidence of these women, which includes managing biodiversity on farms, if that's been the themes that we've talked about. So I think this is my last slide, which you might be happy about. So this one here is just providing a little bit of evidence around our skills, knowledge and confidence. So people kind of rate themselves where they sit before our events and then after our events. So collecting feedback from participants has been vital for us to attract new people and to understand what people are interested in learning. And one of the things that Corangamite Rural Women's Network has delivered is called a Women on Farms program, which is a series of 4 workshops. And it's been designed and delivered in partnership with Southern Farming Systems. And that's been another great way of getting members as well, because some people might not be members of land care, but they're members of the farming systems group. So we partner with these groups. So yes, that's a little bit on the Rural Women's Network, and Bron's done some fantastic stuff with rural women in the Wimmera as well. And so, yeah, I'll hand over to you, Bron.
Thanks, Karen. I'll just provide a bit of information about Chicks in the Sticks, which is an initiative that we began at the Wimmera CMA. So it began way back in 2009 when a field officer was visiting a wetland site with a husband and wife team, and the husband wasn't so convinced that they should be doing anything with the wetland, but the wife was. And whenever the husband got out to open or close the gate, the wife was encouraging our field officer to keep encouraging that her husband to change the wetland hydrology or fence it off, whatever the site visit was for. I can't remember. And when the field officer came back to the office and told us about his experience, it was a real aha moment for us, where we realised that we were not doing enough in our engagement roles to support the 50% of the farmers that we work with in the region. So because of that moment, we set about designing an event that we thought would be really appealing to women and help them be more engaged when it comes to making decisions on their farm, particularly when it comes to sustainability and biodiversity. So there is a bit of a formula to how our Chicks in the Sticks are delivered, and it begins with a clear understanding of our purpose. So generally there's some sort of sustainable agricultural purpose to it. So it might be about soil health, or it might be about biodiversity, or it might be about wetland hydrology, for instance. So we begin with that purpose, and then we find a female landholder who can then give us a tour of her property and explain what they're doing and why, and the benefits and the challenges. We also try and find a female guest speaker who can provide some expert advice to go with that tour. There's an appealing invitation. It's generally women only, and we encourage women to dress up, but to keep the footwear functional. And we also make sure that we include some good food to go with the event too. So there's often a high tea or some fabulous lunch platters or drinks and canapes. And we'll also hold the event obviously on the farm, but we might jazz up the shearing shed or pop up a marquee. So it's an inviting space to be in. So for Wimmera CMA and lots of other people now too, Chicks in the Sticks has proven to be a really successful engagement model, providing a novel and inviting space for farm women to engage in sustainable agriculture more broadly. It's allowed us to reach new audiences, as well as maintain a large group of regular attendees, and also led to increased participation in other Wimmera CMA programs. It's also spread across Victoria, with North Central and Goulburn CMA taking on Chicks in the Sticks and making it their own successfully. It's even garnered the attention of a PhD student in the US. So these are just two examples that we've provided today about how we've added some diversity to our extension mix by providing engagement models which resonate with some female farmers. Some steering committees, focus groups, age-based groups or activities are also great examples of how we can cater to and address different motivations, temperaments and barriers. And I'm sure those who are participating in the webinar today will have great examples of how we can add diversity into an extension as well. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. To summarise our key points, there is complexity behind how decisions are made on farm. If you work in biodiversity or extension, I'd encourage you to have a think about your target audience in terms of their values, barriers, behaviour and temperament, and then just check if your extension of practices is reflecting this. It's really worth investing the time to know your audience and then flex and adjust your own temperament type to work with a diversity of temperaments. Don't make the assumption that by simply sharing knowledge or establishing held values will automatically lead to behaviours changing that you're trying to encourage. And if you're a farmer listening today and you would like better diversity and extension, then I'd make the suggestion to contact your local NRM group, whether it's your catchment management authority or a land care network or a land care group, and give them some feedback on what you think would work in your area. So thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. I hope this has provided some insight into the need to incorporate social science into biodiversity on farms. Thank you.
Thanks, Bron and Karen. That was excellent, and I have to say it's one of those things where we know it's a small world. Going back about 10 years ago when Bron, I think, went first on maternity leave, I took over and did some of the Chicks and Sticks events for the Wimmera Catchment Management Authority. So, and they were a lot of fun. So it's great to see it still being recognised as a great event. So next thing is questions. So I do have some questions here. So I'll put these to Bron and Karen to see what we can come up with. So we have from Danny from the Loddon Plains Landcare Network. Great piece of work, folks. How does this get implemented on the ground? How can the information translate into managing a large group such as Landcare or Regen Ag Group when you're acquiring outcomes at group scale?
So yeah, great question, Danny. Thanks for the question. So I think one of the key things around here is if we do have a lot of dependable and doer farmers in your Landcare group, that there's a lot of power in that local trials and having examples of things that people can see that's relevant to them. It's relevant to their landscape, it's relevant to their farm, and then they can learn from that. So instead of just putting out information flyers or just having a speaker, an expert speaker come in who's a research scientist who tells everybody, you know, all the science behind it and why we should be doing it, if we can actually have those local things to be showing it and to be having the field days there and bringing farmers there, and we're kind of bringing those farmers on the journey, because if they like to see examples of it before they will try it, that's a really key part to this. The other thing that raises some more questions in my mind looking at your questions is I think there's something really fascinating going on in the regenerative agriculture space. And I think it would be really, here's an interesting, if someone wants to go do their honours or their PhD, or I probably should just do some more Googling, I reckon it'd be fascinating to look at the temperament type of people who are sort of calling themselves regenerative farmers and who are identifying with that, versus those farmers who have been researched in the work that we presented today. Because my gut feeling is that there's potentially a little bit of a difference there. And if that's the case, then we would obviously tailor some of our messaging a little bit different for those regenerative farmers. And I think an example of this, what made me think about this is we've got a whole lot of interest in mixed species cover cropping, which I think a lot of people have in their region. And a lot of these people are implementing the practice, trying it on their property and thinking about the big term, long-term benefits. And they haven't necessarily had to see it all done locally before. So that's kind of the reverse of our dependable and our doers. So that's kind of got me thinking about what is their temperament type, because I reckon it might be the other way around, but I could be wrong. So if anyone else has got any thoughts on this, please feel free to chip in. What do you reckon, Bron?
Yep, I agree with what you've popped out there, Karen. I think the other thing I would mention, hopefully this answers your question, Danny, is like I mentioned in the presentation, we've got the social drivers research that gets implemented for the Wimmera CMA about every 5 years. So that gives us a good understanding of what the issues that farmers are facing in our region, and I can use that information to tailor information or events or concepts to particular groups. Hopefully that answers your question, Danny.
Yeah, and so the other point I'd like to make is just the value in feedback, and like Bron's mentioned, ask these people what they want, ask what they need, and also there's a lot of power in having working groups and steering committees that are made up of some of the target audience who you want to engage with. So the better you get to know them and the better we are at listening to them and taking on board their suggestions, then that helps us tailor what we do, because we've actually got our target audience assisting us to design this stuff. And if they're the opposite, if they think the opposite to us, then it's a really, really useful tool, even though sometimes it takes time and it can be frustrating and you feel like you're on a bit of a roller coaster because it seems so obvious where we want to go. And to me, it makes sense. We just do that. But that's not actually how everyone else is thinking. So the whole engagement thing is really important, I feel.
Thanks. Look, we've probably got time for one more quick question here. But the other thing is we've got a request for the links you've got up there, if you can post them in the chat afterwards so people can have a look at them. So the other question I've got here is why the big disconnect between farmers and land care staff?
Yeah, that's an interesting question from Colin and Wendy. I think I'd need some more information from them. Is that an experience that they're having, or is that a generalisation?
I think it was based on what you presented in the thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if anyone. Yeah, not sure. Good question. Great question. I know. We can ask the people who did the research probably have some really good insights into that. So we've presented research today that's been done by Rod Strawn, Cam Nicholson, Jeanette Long. So we've presented information that they've sought, that they've done the research. So it'd be a really interesting conversation to have with them. Yeah.
Okay. Look, we'll finish up there because we've got another speaker to come on. But there's a couple of other questions in there. If you in the chat, if you want to see if you can address those, that'd be great. Otherwise, thank you so much for an absolutely fascinating presentation, and something that I think many of us will get something out of in all of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So moving on to our second presentation today. We've got Tammy Jonas, and the title of her presentation is Farming First Peoples and Biodiversity, Farming in Common with Nature. Tammy is an agroecologist in principle and in practice, farming heritage breed large black pigs, cattle and garlic with her husband Stuart on the unceded lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in the Central Highlands of Victoria. She is president of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance, co-editor and co-author of Farming Democracy: Radically Transforming the Food System from the Ground Up, which was published in 2019, and undertaking a PhD at the University of Western Australia on the biodiverse and decolonising practices and politics of small-scale farmers and the impacts of the state on their efforts. I'll leave Tammy to actually go into her presentation summary. It's absolutely fascinating. I just have to start sharing the content here. So I'll hand over to Tammy to start talking while I do that.
Thanks heaps, Laverne. It's really exciting to be here to share some of the things that I've been working on and thinking about for the last, lifetime. And I'd like to, again, acknowledge that I'm joining from the lands of the Dja Wurrung people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that the land was never ceded. We pay the rent here at Jonai, paying 1% of our income each month to share the benefits of what we earn from this land. And we're listening and learning from the land and the Dja and other First Peoples how to enact a custodial ethic in all that we do here. The presentation's in kind of two parts. I'm going to briefly point to the worst consequences of capitalist industrial agriculture on biodiversity, and then I'm going to turn to agroecological solutions that put First Peoples first for conserving and promoting biodiversity in wild and managed ecosystems. Next slide, please. And I can't see your slide because I'm looking at a different screen, so tell me if I get off. It should say agricultural biodiversity next. Biodiversity for food and agriculture is all the plants and animals, wild and domesticated, that provide food, feed, fuel, and fiber. It's also the myriad of organisms that support food production through ecosystem services, which are often called associated biodiversity. So that includes all the plants, animals, and microorganisms such as insects, bats, birds, mangroves, corals, seagrasses, earthworms, soil-dwelling fungi, and bacteria that keep soils fertile, pollinate plants, purify water and air, keep fish and trees healthy, and fight crop and livestock pests and diseases. And for too long, biodiversity has been considered incompatible with agriculture, like something that happens on the other side of the fence or only in shelter belts. Even the current work by the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, towards a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, it takes a productivist approach to its limited attention to agriculture and a colonial approach to conservation in proposals to lock up more land away from sustainable human use, which is a fundamental violation of First Peoples' right to land and denial of the thousands of years of care and co-production with nature. Australia is among the top 7 countries worldwide responsible for 60% of the world's biodiversity loss between 1996 and 2008. And we're now facing the 6th mass extinction event in 4.6 billion years. In 2019, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN released the first global assessment of biodiversity for food and agriculture. And that report found that many key components of biodiversity for food and agriculture at the genetic, the species, and the ecosystem levels are in decline. And the evidence suggests that the proportion of livestock breeds at risk of extinction is increasing. So agricultural biodiversity globally is disappearing very rapidly as industrial agriculture, forestry, and fisheries systems use homogeneous proprietary seeds, trees, breeds, and aquatic species, scientifically bred and genetically modified to include limited traits which are useful to industry. They're grown in simplified agroecosystems that are heavily contaminated with biocides and other agrochemicals. Of some 6,000 plant species cultivated for food, fewer than 200 contribute substantially to global food output, and only 9 account for 66% of total crop production. The world's livestock production is based on about 40 animal species, with only a handful providing the vast majority of meat, milk, and eggs. Of the 7,745 breeds of livestock considered local, that is, they occur only in one country, 26% are at risk of extinction. Nearly a third of fish stocks are overfished, more than half have reached their sustainable limit, wild food species, and many species that contribute to ecosystem services that are vital to food and agriculture, including pollinators, soil organisms, and natural enemies of pests, are rapidly disappearing. Next slide, please. So it's timely in a period of COVID to remind ourselves of the risks of these extreme losses of biodiversity in agriculture. The production of a constantly narrowing range of species and breeds of animals and plants is leading to greater risks in our food system. In the case of the rise of zoonoses like coronavirus, one of the most significant risks is from intensive livestock production and the expansion of industrial agriculture into remote areas of forest, giving rare pathogens new opportunities to access vulnerable hosts, giving rise to new and more virulent strains of influenza and coronaviruses like COVID-19. Some of the key risks posed by intensive livestock production include the separation of breeding animals from farms where their offspring are raised and later harvested for food, and the narrowing of genetic resources to very few breeds of genetically similar animals that are then crowded into unhealthy conditions which suppress their immune systems. This creates the perfect breeding ground for illness, and these intensive sheds are literally food for flu. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do about it? The good news is that the FAO report highlights a growing interest in biodiversity-friendly practices and approaches globally. 80% of the 91 countries indicate using one or more biodiversity-friendly practices and approaches such as organic agriculture, integrated pest management, conservation agriculture, sustainable soil management, agroecology, sustainable forest management, agroforestry, diversification practices in aquaculture, ecosystems approaches to fisheries, and ecosystems restoration. While most of you have surely heard of regenerative agriculture, agroecology is much less known or understood in Australia. Agroecology is a science, a set of practices, and a social movement that fosters the democratic participation of farmers in the food system. I briefly mentioned the distinction to show that both agroecological and regenerative farmers are all working to recuperate ecosystems from centuries of colonial damage, but also to highlight that the agroecology movement is underpinned by notions of social and economic justice as well, putting solidarity with First Peoples first and solidarity economies that reject corporate power and capitalism next. There's an ancient custodial ethic amongst Indigenous peoples and peasants globally, and a growing one amongst agroecological and regenerative farmers in the global north, stemming from place-based understandings of country, reactions to climate change and loss of biodiversity, and an increasing willingness to grapple with what it means to hold title to unceded lands of First Peoples, while working out local strategies to pay the rent, share land, or give land back to its original owners. I want to share a couple of promising examples of farmers and First Peoples collaborating on country and furthering the agroecological transition with you now. Next, and it should be on Neurofarm. So Neurofarm is a diverse biodynamic farm of 220 acres on Ngunnawal land in the southern tablelands of New South Wales, with heritage breed belted Galloway cattle and rare breed silver grey Dorking chickens and eggs, fruits and vegetables. Marie and Michelle have shared that they are making a part of their land available to local Indigenous custodians for bush tucker, a native nursery, agroforestry for traditional implements, a cool burn school, or perhaps a place for guided tours. Could be all of those things or something else, they say. And the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance recently hosted a solidarity session, which is available on our YouTube channel, with Murray talking about what that collaboration on country looks like. He spoke actually about how the partnership is struck and governed by Yindi Amara, the Wiradjuri law of respect for all things. It means to go slow, be patient, take responsibility, and give respect. They're engaging in a relationalism intrinsic to much Aboriginal political ordering, a way of knowing and being where the very land is the law, and one's relationship to it is based on a mutualism that creates an ethical impulse to care for country and everything on it. Embracing these ways of knowing is a critical and much needed step in the right direction for agriculture in Australia. Next slide, please. Laverne, is the Millpost slide still there? I can't remember if it...
Yes, it is.
Fabulous, thank you. Millpost Farm is also in the southern tablelands of New South Wales, And they transitioned a family sheep farm to a broadacre permaculture farm in the late 70s. They produce wool and a small offering of organic garlic and tomatoes, in addition to providing most of their own food for 3 generations living together on the farm. Millpost have also been working to make the land to which they hold title available to Ngunnawal Ngambri mob to reconnect with their ancestral country, while also providing access to researchers to a stone axe quarry identified on the farm. And guided by the local mob, the Watson family then provide guidance to academics on how to protect a sacred place while letting it be appreciated as a cultural place for the original owners. Next slide, please. Here on my own farm, Jonai Farms and Meatsmiths in the Central Highlands of Victoria on Djadjawurrung country, we have an example of a circular bioeconomy working to enact our custodial ethic. Pictured here, you see on the left a bin of spent grain from a local beer brewery, which we collect twice weekly to feed our pigs, along with other feedstuffs from what would otherwise end up as waste somewhere else. We've built a butcher shop on our farm where I work with a small team to break down our pig and cattle carcasses into a range of fresh cuts, smoked meats, sausages, and charcuterie. And we're also a community-supported agriculture or CSA farm. So nearly all of our meat goes to 80 households who are members of the farm. They commit to a minimum of 1 year in a solidarity economy, and most have been with us for many years, sharing the risks as well as the delicious rewards of the farm. Bones that remain after we've processed carcasses into fresh cuts and soup stocks are then pyrolyzed in the retort pictured in the center bottom there to create bone char, a kind of charcoal of bones that maintains the carbon as well as trace minerals such as phosphorus, magnesium, and potassium, which is then activated in barrels of biofertilizer and used to grow our small commercial crop of garlic, pictured with 2 rows of my first wheat crop for our bread making in the bottom right photo. And like millions of other smallholders around the world, we are maintaining biodiversity at the genetic, species, and ecosystem levels and living a life made in common with nature. We conserve and sustainably use the biodiversity in our care and share the benefits of our sustainable use with the original owners by paying the rent. Next slide, please. I just want to turn briefly to the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance's work that is trying to help us understand more about collaborations on country and listening to First Peoples. So we recently established the Agroecology Action Research Network, and we're also working on an Agroecology D-Centre here at Jonai Farms. AFSA is also launching our First Peoples First strategy at this year's Food Sovereignty Convergence, which will be in October, which aims to achieve both Indigenous sovereignty and food sovereignty for all. We're working with farmers and allies who are embracing and espousing a custodial ethic to understand how they are currently or may in the future be able to extend their care for land to care for its original owners, bringing settler descendants full circle to find ways and means of restitution of land and rights to First Peoples. There are various complexities involved in settler descendants being on this land. To consciously think of oneself as a settler means being conscious that we live on an Indigenous people's land. Importantly for the food sovereignty movement, this carries with it an obligation to support those defending their homelands and to support ongoing attempts to unsettle the settler conscience by staying with the trouble of colonialism. There's often an unwarranted generosity from First Peoples in Australia towards settler descendants and other more recent migrants in the face of ongoing colonisation of unceded Aboriginal lands. A generosity Indigenous scholars have written is born of the same ways of being at the root of the custodial ethic they share. Mary Graham, a Kombumerri person up in southern Queensland, and her settler colleague Morgan Brigg recommend moving forward with autonomous regard, which can between Indigenous and settler peoples, which can be an ethical relation that acknowledges and sits with the brutality of dispossession through settler colonialism. We know as an historically and currently non-Indigenous led organization, we still have a lot of deep listening, learning, and acting to do. And final slide, please. AFSA has worked for 10 years in solidarity with the global food sovereignty movement to assert everyone's right to nutritious and culturally determined food, grown and distributed in ethical and ecologically sound ways, and our right to democratically determine our own food and agriculture systems. And we invite you to join us in our work to be active in our optimism in these challenging times. And I would just like to finish by sharing the AFSA website through which you can find the solidarity sessions that we've been hosting to share the good work and promote the good work and encourage more people to be actively optimistic in dealing with the incredibly challenging times that we are in, and know how to sit with the trouble of colonialism and work to decolonize our solidarity and our agricultural systems for a healthier future for everyone. So thank you for having me, and I hope there's some sticky questions because I like being put on the spot.
Thanks very much, Tammy. As always, you've given us some fantastic food for thought and challenged, I'm sure, challenged some of our views and perceptions on how we should be managing our environment and our farming environment as well. So I'll ask people for questions now. I haven't got anything up here as yet. We've got a comment here, very inspirational in integrated thinking and business model. Thanks, Tammy. I don't know if you've got any other questions.
Sustainable behavior. Yeah, I mean, I could. The AFSA is hosting Fair Food Week again next month from, I think it's the Laverne, you'll remember, or you can tell me. And our Fair Food Week website is actually this year, because we can't gather in ways that we normally would, we're putting up a lot of things about what you can read or podcasts you can listen to keep furthering your own kind of education in how we can all do better in our practices and in our listening.
So I do have a question here. Do you find neighbours are interested or following your lead?
Yes, and we're following some of theirs too. So I think we live in a up here near Dalesford. It's a very progressive area with a very long history of agriculture and a mix of kind of people. I think people are very interested in aspects of our system, like the solidarity economies that have seen us through difficult farming times. And yeah, I mean, we don't have to sell meat. We get to just farm and it's already pre-sold. So they're very interested in that. They're very interested in when you access waste stream feed and you divert landfill and turn it into animal feed, it not only reduces your costs, it reduces the farm's kind of environmental costs as well. So everybody's very interested in those things. And we have a really vibrant community of young farmers here as well, who are helping push all of us, I think, to think more with each other about how we do some of this First People's First work and decolonize our solidarity. So yeah, I think it's a very much a growing movement here, just right near us, but also around the country, because we're talking with each other and like having Murray from Neurofarm do the talk with us, that inspired more people to say, well, what can I do? And I'm hoping we're going to see a land sharing network arise in Australia in the next couple of months, really.
Great. The next question I've got here is, do you have members of the Food Sovereignty Alliance in the Wimmera? I'm going to declare that yes, we do, because I am one and I'm also on the National Committee as well. So we do, but there's always room for plenty more if people are interested. It's I can honestly say it's a great group of people to be involved with, because you are challenged, and there's a lot of great conversations about different perspectives, and I think that's always a really useful approach. So, you know, all are welcome. Just bring your open mind.
Absolutely.
So I've got some other questions here. What do you think are the barriers for more farmers to engage in CSA model?
So I think for some farmers, the CSA model is tricky if you don't have a population base that can support you, you know, with the membership. And so those are people who tend to sell into commodity chains because they have to get the food further from where they're producing it. That's definitely a challenge. But having said that, if you keep your system small enough, then it can be to the size of a small local population like ours is. So I think, yeah, access to a population is probably one of the challenges, but one probably links back to what Karen and Bronwyn were talking about around sort of temperament and mindset. You know, if you decide to run your farm as a CSA, the solidarity economy is not just the members being in solidarity with you. You have to reciprocate. You need to be acting in solidarity with them. You have to be spending some time educating them about this kind of agriculture, about what it takes to produce food. We have, when members have had financial difficulties, we've continued to feed them if it was a short period of difficulty, or reduce the cost for them, just whatever we can do to look after them, same as they do us. And you have to be of the mind that wants to work that closely, I guess, with your members. One of the hardest ones I find, though, in Australia is people find it really hard to ask people who buy their food to share the risk with them. People are proud, and they think that it's somehow weak, maybe, to ask people to share the risks of farming with you. And so I think getting over that mindset is a big one for some people, and working out how to say, you know what, sometimes farmers are vulnerable to risks beyond our control, and the food system would be healthier if the eaters shared in some of that risk, within reason, obviously. So I think those are some of the barriers, but they're not too hard to overcome. And there's not only examples of the CSA farms in Farming Democracy that we published in 2018, but also we've done 2 or 3 solidarity sessions around CSAs. So if anybody's interested, they're available on our YouTube channel, and you should go and have a watch and see if it's for you.
Great, thank you. I haven't got any other questions here. If anyone's got any questions, so it'd be great to get in quick. One of the things I'd like to ask Tammy to talk a little bit more about, because it's one of the areas that the AFSA gets into, is farming on other people's land, and the opportunities that are now hopefully going to become more available, particularly for younger people who want to get into farming.
So FUPL, we established about 2 or 3 years ago now, and farming on other people's land was called that partially in recognition that most of us are not Indigenous who are involved with the food sovereignty movement here, and so we're all farming on other people's land in that case, and we don't want to forget it and what it means to our responsibilities. But of course, there are quite a lot of young people who would just love to be farming, whether it's on their own land or somebody else's, and access is the barrier. So to date, FUPL has helped with a number of share farming agreements between landholders who have spare land for young farmers to come and start working on. We have right now 4 and about to be 6 former Jonai interns that are farming on other people's land, who we helped facilitate into those positions locally, and again, help with the agreements, so making sure everybody has shared expectations of what it means to farm on somebody else's land. And what we find is that the landholders, who are often older farmers who are decreasing their farming activities but still have this abundance of land, they want to see the farm continue to be farmed. And they become incredible mentors to the young farmers as well, because they have a lifetime of experience on that country. So it's something we'd like to see it develop more. And there's the Agrarian Trust in America, which is actually a charity that buys land and then leases it at very cheap rates to young and emerging farmers. So to get to that stage would be amazing. But as a voluntary committee with one staff member 1 day a week, it's hard to do everything that we'd like to. If someone has, a hankering to do more volunteer work and they want to start an agrarian trust with us, hit me up.
Great, thanks, Tammy, for that. Well, I don't actually have any more questions here, so we might start wrapping up. But thank you so much, Tammy, for your always inspirational perspectives on all of this, and also to Bron and Karen for the presentations today. I think one of the hallmarks of the Wimmera Biodiversity Seminar, whether we have it online or in person, is the fact that we always strive to challenge people with different ideas or different perspectives, or what's happening out there, and how we can all take on board some of these things to improve what we all do, whether we're farmers or whether we're land care facilitators, NRM professionals, or whatever we might be doing in our day jobs and so forth. But all the people that come to this event and have come, some of them for 24 years now, are committed to improving the biodiversity in our region and what we all get out of it. So thank you very much to our fantastic speakers today. I'd ask you all to give them a round of applause, but it's not possible. But we've certainly got plenty of comments on there that people have enjoyed the conversations and the presentations today. So we've got a few hand clappings going on there. So thank you very much. And I would remind everyone, we've still got another 2 sessions online next week and the week after. So we look forward to seeing many of you then. And thank you so much for your participation today. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be on an all